time is finally here. We get Iowa State football this Saturday. Welcome in to the Iowa State Fan Perspective. As always, brought to you by the Play the Fight Song College Football Show. Subscribe to our channel. We cover everything college football on our live weekly episodes, as well as giving you some fan perspective from the Iowa State side, the Nebraska side, and the Iowa Hawkeye side. A little unfortunately, but Jordan does a nice job for us on that side as well, covering you everything from Midwest college football to all across the country. Week 0 has happened. 4 awesome games. That was a lot of fun, but I think you're tuning in here tonight to really get a breakdown on who is the North Dakota Fighting Hawks. What can we expect as an Iowa State fan on Saturday? Give us a little bit of game breakdown, opponent breakdown, and then let's get this thing started. It's time to go. I will see you guys in the lots at Jack Trice Stadium this Saturday. Hope to see you guys there and hope you guys are as excited as I am. I'm usually joined by my co-host. My brother Justin comes on here and helps break down the Cyclones with us. But he will be joining us for Cyhawk Week, as well as giving us some thoughts on the North Dakota game. And he'll be there with me this Saturday as well. Looking forward to getting back together with him to watch some Cyclone football. Let's kind of get started. If you've listened to us before, appreciate you guys tuning back in. We broke down a lot of roster stuff, some thoughts on the season as a whole. We gave, I think our last episode, we gave an actual record prediction for the Cyclones this year. We're not going to necessarily go into that. We're strictly focusing on pretty much North Dakota and maybe some overall thoughts before we finally play the first game of the season. So go back, go through our channel. We've got a lot of great episodes. Go back and see our thoughts on what we think of the Cyclones here heading into 2024. Let's get right into it. Let's get into the North Dakota Fighting Hawks out of the Missouri Valley. If you're unfamiliar with this program, this is a team who joined the Missouri Valley Football Conference, I believe 5 years ago. Head coach Bubba Schweigert, he's been there for 11 years now. He's starting to get this program pretty consistently in the Missouri Valley. This team kind of struggled when it first joined, but this is a really good football league. You hear Jordan, my co-host, and I on the Play the Fight Song College Football Show talk about this is the SEC of the FCS outside of maybe the Montana schools. This is a team that's starting to get better. They beat their rivals last year, North Dakota State. I think everybody's pretty familiar with them in the FCS world. They beat them by 20 last year. So this is a team that's catching its footing, trying to hold its own. It's hasn't had a ton of success against FBS opponents, but I think we're going to get a program this weekend that it's new. I'm excited to see. It's UND for those who are in the area and not UNI. Iowa State, it seems like each and every single year our FCS opponent becomes UNI. So it's kind of good to get a new now. UNI is, I would say North Dakota is a better program than where UNI is right now in the Missouri Valley. They had a pretty good, successful season last year, 7-5. Like I said, they beat their rival North Dakota State by 20+. They lost to South Dakota State by 20+, and they played FBS Boise State, and they lost to them by 20+ as well. I will break down that Boise State game just a little bit to give you guys an idea later in the show. But I'm sure you guys want to know, if you haven't, Iowa State opens up 2:30 kick, Fox Sports 1. You don't have to go to ESPN Plus to find this football game, which is exciting for fans who can watch this national televised if you're not going to be in Jack Trice Stadium on Saturday. Iowa State now opens up as a 26-point favorite. I believe the last time Justin and I talked, it was up to 28. So the money's coming down a little bit. Maybe people are on the Fighting Hawks, which is fine. Iowa State hasn't really, they're not accustomed to really blowing out FCS opponents in recent history. I know they took care of Southeast Missouri a couple of years ago, but most of the time these games are kind of sleepers, and it's just kind of a grinding halt when it comes to these games. So to see it at 26 right now is a little surprising, but there's a lot of money on Iowa State to be that dark horse team in the Big 12. So not necessarily surprised that going into week 1, Iowa State is such a big favorite. If you're interested in the over-unders, 51.5. So Iowa State is a big point spread favorite, but the over-under isn't very high. So what does that tell you? I think the Sharps think that Iowa State's defense is going to show up. I would like to see what North Dakota team total is as we move on this week. Don't be surprised if it's even under 14.5 points, if I'm going to be honest. Let's get back into the personnel for the North Dakota Fighting Hawks. This is a group that I think was pretty good last year. They finished the season in the top 20 in the FCS play. I think they finished at 16th. But they kind of lost a lot of key guys, which puts me a little bit less bullish on this football team holding its own against Iowa State on Saturday. They lost 2 starting offensive linemen, one to the NFL, I think I saw. And then one of them, the kid, I think he was the Kitley kid. He's actually at Kansas State right now, and he was a top 100 transfer portal recruit this offseason. Was a really good offensive lineman for North Dakota last year. Iowa State will be seeing them in the Farmageddon matchup. So losing 2 big offensive line pieces, especially in FCS play, how do you reload? It's more so in the recruiting, and it's honestly development and guys you've had previously under your guys. So new guys stepping in for North Dakota on the offensive line. I think they're going to have their hands full against a really good defensive line that I am very high on. If you've listened to previous episodes when I talk about the Iowa State defensive line, their quarterback graduated last year, and two of their top 3 receivers are gone as well. The quarterback was a really good piece for them, 5th-year guy who really accounted for a lot of their production. So to lose him, kind of a big loss. I'm interested to see where they go. There was a junior last year that appeared in 5 games, didn't get a ton of reps, but I would expect him probably to be the starter from I haven't dived into North Dakota too much. I didn't spend hours on this, but I spent a good hour trying to find out what this roster is really consistent of. And I think they're going to go with this kid who's going to be a senior for them this year, who doesn't have a lot of experience. So how does John Haycock really rattle this kid in his first start against a really consistent defense in the Big 12 and quite honestly in college football, probably the last 5-6 years? They graduated one of their top cornerbacks and their defensive line. If you go to their media guide on their website, their defensive lineman of the year and their cornerback of the year last year, they gave these by, I assume, their teammates rank them, or their coaching staff kind of gives their votes. So they lost to what they consider 2 of their top players on that side of the ball. Where they're going to be really consistent is their best player is probably wide receiver Bo Belquist. He was their leading receiver last year, a 5th-year guy, had over 700 yards. He was in the top of the Missouri Valley in catches per game. He's got a big body, big frame to him. He's like 6'5", 185. I'm not necessarily sure how he's going to match up against his Iowa State secondary, but you don't have a TJ Tampa lining up across from him that you can rely on to shut down their number 1 receiver. So I think this is a good opportunity to get Miles Purchase the reins, maybe Darian Porter. What does that kind of look like? Jontez Williams. I look at kind of maybe those 3 guys. Who's going to be that number 1 guy, not that number 1 option at the cornerback spot for John Haycock's defense this year? I think it's a good kind of tune up in week 1. I think Belquist is a solid receiver, and he's going to see if Iowa State can lock him down to get back their starting running back who had over 700 yards last year. So a couple of productions at the skill positions that they can rely on to hopefully, be a security blanket for that new quarterback this year. But that's really who you need to know as far as the offensive side of the ball. The linebackers are really the key returners for them. 2 of their top tacklers, especially at linebacker, return for them. Wyatt Padigo led the team in tackles last year, and he actually led the nation in fumble recoveries in FCS play. He's kind of a game wrecker, looking to create turnovers, create havocs. He even stripped Ashton Jeanty last year in the Boise State game. So this is a guy who can wreak some havoc if given the opportunity. Defensively, this just isn't a good football team compared to FBS level play. We averaged 4.5 yards per carry that they gave up, 12.9 yards per catch. Secondary is just not very good, especially. Like I said, I think the linebackers are probably the strongest part of their group. They have a Division III All-American that transferred in a defensive end. Hopefully that secures that spot up where they lost a couple of their top guys on the defensive line. But I think the secondary is probably the worst part of this group, just from the very brief research that I was looking up this team. So I think this is a good opportunity for Iowa State's loaded wide receiver room to really have a day on Saturday. They also gave up just 445 yards total on defense last year. This is a group that gave up a lot of yards. Surprisingly, held their own against Boise State a little bit. That kind of kept them in that football game last year, going back and looking at it. So let's start there. I think when you look at these FCS opponents, you want to look out for some key guys that maybe come back in week 1, and just looking at common FBS opponents. Like, how do they fare against teams that are similar to Iowa State's level? But I would say right now, I think Iowa State's even a step up from Boise State. Boise State, as you guys know, if you listen to our college football show, really high on. It's a top two, if not the best team in the Mountain West. And last year they won the Mountain West, despite a sluggish start to 2023. Boise sacked them 6 times. They got after the quarterback. I said last year their quarterback was probably their best offensive player, and they really got to him. I think they limited him to like 175 yards. He was 58% completion percentage, and they got to him 6 times. They rushed for 42 total yards on Boise State last year. Boise State is a good defensive line compared to the Mountain West. I think Iowa State is even a step up from that. And I know you guys agree with me as well. So I think that's really where Iowa State's going to force their issue this week because, like I said, they return their leading rusher. I think they're going to rely on him to kind of take that step up this year to take off some of the load for that new quarterback. I think it's just a bad time and a bad opponent that you're seeing in week 1 with Iowa State, especially in the middle with J.R. Singleton, Dominic Orange. These are 2 guys who I would be very disappointed, quite frank, if Iowa State gave up more than 3 yards per carry on Saturday. Statistically, I want to set a number there. And especially when you have to see the Iowa Hawkeyes who rely on the run in 2 weeks, set the tone now. And that's where I want to see Iowa State really dominate. They gave up only 43 yards on the other end to Ashton Jeanty. If you guys know who Ashton Jeanty is, he's a top 5 running back in the country. I think he's the best running back in the Mountain West for Boise State, and they only held him to 43 yards. Taylon Green was the quarterback at Boise State at the time, a dual threat guy. He's going to be Arkansas's starter this year. Held him to 180 yards. Despite giving up 445 yards per game last year to a lot of teams and what they averaged, actually they didn't give up a ton of yards to Boise. But Boise capitalized in the red zone. They had 3 touchdowns from Jeanty alone. I think they were 4 for 5. So they weren't really able to slow them down when they got the opportunity. On the other side, they scored 3 touchdowns in that game. They lost 42-18. They were 3 for 3 in the red zone. North Dakota was against Boise State. I think Iowa State, that's a spot on the defense where Iowa State did struggle last year. Red zone defense. I don't think it is as dominant as it should have been. It wasn't as locked down as it could be. And let's see if North Dakota can convert if they give those chances. I think they'll only get 2, maybe 3 opportunities, maybe even less on Saturday. Can Iowa State hold them to field goals, maybe force a turnover if they try to get risky, go for it on 4th down because they're playing a Power 4 program. They just kind of want to take some chances in this football game. So I want to see Iowa State's red zone defense be a lot better. All in all, battle. They won the turnover battle last year against Boise, 1-0. But I think that Iowa State, despite the 26-point spread, I think Iowa State should be able to hold their own. If you guys are looking to bet this football game, week 1's got a lot of really good games. I wouldn't touch it, but I know that some people just like to bet this football game because they're going to be there. I would stay away from the spread, but it seems like Iowa State has been able to cover against FCS opponents the last few years, even if it has been a UNI who Iowa State struggled with in the last decade or so. I mean, even last year, they took care of them. Iowa State, on the other side, comparing FBS to FCS for Iowa State, I thought they dominated UNI last year. The line of scrimmage, I was really impressed with Tyler Onyedem, Dominic Orange. Those are 2 guys that I was like, wow, I think our defensive line is going to be really good this year. They're pushing them around. You guys know my thoughts on the D-line. I thought they disappointed last year, but they really set the tone in week 1 where I kind of overreacted. I expect the same performance from them on Saturday. So going off of that, let's talk about some players to watch. You know, I just gave you a couple of guys for North Dakota, but we want to talk about the Cyclones. Starts with the defensive line, man. I think going into the season without seeing anything yet, yes, we have Rocco Becht, who is just as consistent as it gets, and it's exciting that he's going to be our quarterback this year. But there's a lot of other really good players on this team, man, that I think everybody needs to learn. And if you've listened to me, if you listened to our episodes before, Kennard Snyder is a guy I just continue to rave about because everything I hear from coaches in the press conference continues to believe that this guy is the missing piece for that defensive line this year that they lacked last year. You look at a guy like Enio Wazirike, Will McDonald, Jaquan Bailey, really good physical pass rushers that signified a really good John Haycock defense. Kennard Snyder could be that guy. And on the other side, Tyler Onyedem is also a guy who I think could take that next role. Maybe they are a Wazirike and Jaquan Bailey kind of duo. I think that's what Iowa State lacked last year that potentially kept them away from competing for a Big 12 championship and taking that spot from Oklahoma State, losing to games like Kansas and things like that. The pass rush and the defensive line just needs to be better. Kennard Snyder, the ULM transfer, and Tyler Onyedem are two guys I think can be all conference level guys. I think I've even seen some mock draft stuffs on like Onyedem. Like TO, they think is really good. Coach Sheed is raved about both of those guys in his press conference. And Coach Sheed's probably one of the best. He's actually the best coach to listen to in any of his press conference if you get a chance to. Out of all the position coaches, you got to go listen to the defensive line coach. So it starts with those guys. I'm gonna be basic, and I'm gonna say it. Kyle Conrady, the new kicker in town. I think he's a Dubuque walk-on. We've heard the rumors that he's been able to convert some 50-yard field goals in practice and fall camp. Super exciting. Even on, I think, like Cyclone Fanatic, they leaked some tea leaves that he was pushing Chase Contreras for the starting job at the end of the year, but Chase Contreras was so good at the end of the year. He was really consistent and reliable that they just couldn't do it. So they put the opportunity in front of Conrady, and let's see if he can take advantage of it, man. I think that this is an opportunity on Saturday when you maybe get up 17 or 20 points and say you're on the 25 and it's 4th and 3. And you look at it like maybe in another game you go for that. But it's like, no, it's kind of like if you guys watch NFL preseason football, anytime you can get your kicker an opportunity to get a live game rep, take advantage of it. We want to see this guy. I think Contreras, somebody maybe remind me in the comments. I think Contreras had a giant field goal in the UNI game last year, and it opened our eyes to him right away and kind of set the tone. Let's do the same thing with this kid. It's super basic to talk about the kicker, but if you're an Iowa State fan, if you're a true Iowa State fan, you've been rooting for this team for 20, 25 years, 10, 15 years. If you're a younger fan, it doesn't really matter, man. Like the kicking position has been absolutely critical for Iowa State's success, winning in the margins, winning close games. This is what Matt Campbell does. This is what he's been doing for his entire coaching career at Iowa State. You got to win these close games. A kicker is just as important as some of the other pieces on this entire football team. Now let's get to a fun skill position player to watch. Unfortunately, Daniel Jackson goes down with a season-ending injury. A veteran wide receiver, man, who's battled through injury his entire career. He was a guy who was offered by USC early on, so in his high school career. So just to see him kind of go down when I thought he was coming into his own last year, tough to see. But on the football side of things, Iowa State's very fortunate to have a deep wide receiver room. I think that's been the number one talking point when it comes to Iowa State preseason talk is how good the wide receivers are and how loaded they are. Isaiah Alston comes in from Army. So another transfer, and this is my player to watch. I'm looking at North Dakota State receiver Eli Green to be that guy to keep an eye out for. I think that this is a guy who can replace Daniel Jackson in that similar position. Alston's from Army, he's kind of a bigger threat downfield kind of guy. Green is a Daniel Jackson type that can step into this role. He was really good at North Dakota State. He's seen North Dakota before. He just saw him last year. Why not give him a spin and give him an opportunity on Saturday to kind of show Cyclone fans how good this kid could be? And another guy that you might want to look out for, wide receiver, Ben Ngoyi, the Nebraska kid. This is a guy the coaches seem to rave about, and he had a huge catch in the Memphis game last year that he just has that big play opportunity. I don't think he plays a similar position as Daniel Jackson, but when you play these FCS games and you're fortunate enough, if you have a big enough lead, you look out for young guys. Ben Ngoyi is that guy. Eli Green is the guy I want to look at as the Daniel Jackson replacement. So that being said, let's get to the final predictions, kind of my final thoughts for Saturday. It's just not as exciting. Obviously, it's week 1. We're excited to have football back, but when you play a team like North Dakota, it's not something you get overly jacked for, but I don't think it's something you want to overlook as well. Like I said, they're a consistent football program. They're a hard-nosed football program in the Missouri Valley. This is not Southeast Missouri a couple of years ago. This isn't Ohio Valley football. If you guys are sickos and you pay attention to the FCS level, there's a big difference between the Pioneer League, the Ohio Valley, and then the Missouri Valley Conference. So can't overlook this football team. I think they need to come out and play. So where does that come from? Iowa State needs to dominate the line of scrimmage. Plain and simple, I think, especially on the defensive line. And guys, or Iowa State fans in the comments might be like, that's ridiculous. We got to see what this offensive line looks like. Guys, you can go elsewhere and listen to other podcasts and hear them talk about the offensive line. For me, I didn't obviously. Do I look like I was an offensive line in high school? No, I know nothing about offensive line play. You just look at like pressure rate and if guys are getting to the quarterback or if you can't run the ball for more than 2 yards. So to say anything about the offensive line before I've seen them in action in week 1, it just wouldn't make sense to me. I talked about last year, the defensive line just looked so dominant against an FCS opponent in UNI last year in week 1. I want to see the same thing, man. I want Dominic Orange to set the tone this year as, I'll come out and say it, probably the best defensive tackle in the Big 12. I think he has that potential. And Iowa State, in its history, has never had a defensive tackle that has the potential I think Dominic Orange has, quite honestly. We've had good edge rushers. We've had good pass rushers, but Iowa State has never had a guy in the middle that's clogged up space, that is truly dominated. Ray Lima was really good a few years ago, but even then, he was like a third team all conference guy. I'm telling you right now, I think Dominic Orange could be a first team all conference guy who could dominate this football team. And like I said, my expectation, I am not concerned with the linebackers or the secondary in the passing attack with a fresh quarterback in North Dakota on Saturday. It's going to be the running back. They're going to want to get this running back going. He's a veteran guy that they can rely on. I'm telling you, 3 yards per carry or less. That is what I want to see on Saturday. I think that's how you put a stranglehold on this game and dominate it. How many running backs do we see? Look for that. Do we see Dylan Lee, Carson Hansen? Obviously, Abusama is going to be probably the starting running back on Saturday. There's other guys, the Jalen Jackson kid from Eastern Michigan. There are so many guys in this running back room. Matt Campbell's been known to do this, man. And I know people think that we might have already a number 1 option heading into 2024 in Abusama. I'm telling you that it's not as clear cut as you might think it is. Sama's really good. He showed big play potential last year, but there were some things that, like in the Memphis game, I think he's got to work on. And I just don't think it's given to him right now because I think the running back room is really good. And there's one thing that Matt Campbell loves to do, and he loves to cycle through running backs in September. Like he's not afraid to go 2-3 running backs. And by the time he gets into October in Big 12 play, he'll know who's getting 20 carries a game. But until then, in week 1 against North Dakota, I wouldn't be surprised if 4 running backs get a carry. So how many running backs get in the game? What kind of packages do they show? Is Carson Hansen more of a receiver running back? Is Abu Sama just our workhorse? Is Dylan Lee just an all running back kind of guy? Or is he just getting carries? Is he more of a pass protector than a receiver? These are questions I want to see, and I think it's something Iowa State fans should keep an eye out. Last thing, if Iowa State gets up by 17 to 20 points, this will be a sleeper, man, in the second half. It's if you're anything like me, head back to the tailgate lots, enjoy a couple of Ames Lagers, Miller Lights, whatever you indulge in, and then get back to the seats probably like 13 minutes to start the second half. I know Iowa State fans are rolling their eyes when they hear that because Iowa State fans are notorious for being late to the second half. I'm not usually, but this game you certainly could afford to because, number 1, nationally televised. You probably have a TV in the parking lot. You can start watching the game on. Number 2, we've seen this time and time again. If Iowa State dominates the way they're supposed to, like Southeast Missouri, like UNI, that second half it's a nap, quite frankly. And I mean that in the best of way. I think Iowa State fans want it to be a nap. Nobody wants to go into the FCS week 1 game and have to worry about you're a touchdown, you're up a touchdown going into the fourth quarter. No, make it boring. Make it boring. Get up 21-3 going into halftime. Finish that football game. Let's throw a final prediction out there for you guys. If they get up 21-3 at half, I think they end this football game. Let's go. I'm thinking 42-17 is kind of where I'm at. Does Iowa State get to 42 points? It just depends on how good the backups are, quite honestly, in the second half. Like, how good are the running backs? Is the offensive line pushing the defensive line around? Is like Iowa State's offensive line a lot better than what we expected? Could be. Dylan Lee might play the entire second half and has that spring break or that spring game type of performance. He's just that good. So does JJ Cole get in, and do they get to throw him around a little bit? Does Taylor Mauser, as the new offensive coordinator, get to try some things as his first time calling plays as the Cyclone offensive coordinator? A lot of familiarity with guys returning for Iowa State, but there are still a ton of questions with this football team. And I think that's what makes this so exciting, man. I think everybody's just ready to watch real football. We got a little appetizer of it this weekend with week 0. And if you guys are anything like us, you're ready to go. Before I close us out here, make sure that you guys subscribe, like the video. We're going to give you guys Iowa State reactions and previews for every single game this season. Shop at our partners at No Rivals. Unfortunately, they came out with an Iowa Hawkeye hat last week. They look sweet. I hate to admit it, but we got to show them some love. Parks, the Nebraska fan on our side of the show, agrees. Iowa State, Nebraska fans, we got to give this company a shout out, telling them to put out some merch, because I know that our fan base will be able to sell them out. But if you're like us and you like to support other teams and their caps, shopnorivals.com and use the code PTFS at checkout. That's PTFS. Play the fight song at checkout for free shipping. Rock a hat, and let's get them on the Cyclone train here pretty soon. Before I close us out, let's go to other Big 12 games to note. As much of a Cyclone fan as I am, I love the Big 12 in general. I could sit there. It's kind of one of my guilty pleasures. I could sit here and talk Big 12 football to anybody for hours. And I'm so happy we get Big 12 football Thursday, Friday, and then obviously on Saturday. Let's start on Thursday. Coach Prime, Colorado, everybody knows about it, makes their Big 12 debut Thursday night against North Dakota's rival in North Dakota State. I believe that's on ESPN Thursday night. Colorado, North Dakota State. Spread's pretty close right now on the betting lines, about 9 points from what I saw. Really fascinating game. I know that the country's going to have their eyes on that one. Friday night, we get an absolute beauty, man. TCU travels to Stanford. Stanford's a team right now that's win totals about like 3.5. They're not supposed to be a good football team, but they got Io Manor, who's one of the best receivers in college football. That's a sneaky road trip. I'm not high on TCU. If you've listened to our Big 12 show on our Play the Fight Song College Football show, our Big 12 preview, I'm not high on TCU. It's one of the teams I just do not like. I don't think I have enough security with really any position on that football team. So let's see if big TCU is legit and can travel to Palo Alto and win that football game. Oklahoma State hosts another Missouri Valley, the Missouri Valley Kings in South Dakota State. I think that's on 1 o'clock on Saturday. Absolutely fascinating, guys. South Dakota State's running on a 29-game winning streak, back-to-back national champions at the FCS level. Their last loss was to the Iowa Hawkeyes. They host, honestly, a lot of people's favorite to make the Big 12 title in Oklahoma State, the best running back in college football, and Ollie Gordon. That's fascinating, man. Oklahoma State had a bad start to 2023 last year. They cannot afford to start sluggish against South Dakota State, or they will punch them in the mouth. If you're in the tailgating lots at Jack Trice on Saturday, throw that game on before you head in. Let's watch the first half of that. I think that's going to be awesome. Willie Fritz makes his Big 12 debut. Houston plays UNLV. Home game, like a pick 'em right now. I'm not really sure what's in store for Houston, and I think we're going to find out early, see if they can hold their own against UNLV. Last but not least, this is my favorite. We're going to break this one down on our live show this week for all across the country. West Virginia hosting Penn State. Penn State goes to Morgantown. It's a sellout. Ticket prices are at like $300 right now. West Virginia, one of those teams kind of similar to Iowa State, has a lot of returning, has their quarterback, a lot of momentum this year after a pretty solid season last year, winning 9 games. They welcome James Franklin and the Penn State Nittany Lions into Morgantown. They are going into an absolute hornet's nest, and I cannot wait to watch that game. You can guarantee if you find us in the parking lot in Ames on Saturday, that will be the game that is on TV for us as we pay attention to how that Big 12 team can hold up to one of the Big 10's best. So that being said, let's close this out here. 42-17, Iowa State wins on Saturday. That's my prediction. There's a lot of questions and a lot of new faces that I'm really wanting to see in some of the young guys. I hope it's a sleeper so we can see some of those new faces. Overall, I'm so excited for college football to be back. I'm so excited for Iowa State football to be back. This should be a good season, something to be really excited about if you're a Cyclone fan right now. I hope to see you all in Ames on Saturday. Kickoff at 2:30. My name's Jake. My co-host Justin and I will be back for Cyhawk Preview next week. As always, give us a subscribe, like this video, give us a comment. What's your thoughts on Iowa State heading into 2024? Before we close it out here, you know what I always got to say. We're going away. Go Cyclones.